Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, after about 2 weeks of a perfect vacation, and I know probably Vince is not doing too good. I know Peeps is doing great after that perfect vacation, and I know I'm doing great. But the fact of the matter is this. It is Saturday, June 18th, 2022, 12:01 p.m. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, would it really be a Saturday afternoon without the one podcast that will go ahead and give you laughs, good times, and all the wrestling news possible? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of the phenomenon known to all as Saturday afternoon's main event. Speaking of phenomenons, if you don't know who I am, then I suggest you go ahead, go to school or the library, find the biggest dictionary you can find, preferably Merriam-Webster, and look me up under the term phenomenal. Ladies and gentlemen, it is me once again, the phenomenal one. And of course, you know that I am not alone. Why? Because joined with me is my co-host, the limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, son of a gun who's not having a hard time holding his alligators down. Now give me 2 claps and a Peeps Nate.
Woo! Yes, I am back once again with my partner, Deep Voice Dynamo, here in the building. Hey, how was your vacation?
I mean, it was great. It was great. You know, it just didn't feel right not being in front of a microphone and actually going ahead and getting down to wrestling news. And it was pretty weird. Why? Because for the past 2 weeks, not once did I even utter the words, I digress. It didn't feel right.
Getting used to that, yeah.
It really didn't feel right, man. But hey, listen, we're back, right?
Yes, and so is the pen. The pen is back for the next season. First season premiere. We got the pen ready. Got a different pen. Little red tip. Red on the end. Red is my favorite color, so I said, why not? There we go.
Why not? We went from black to blue and now to red. Ladies and gentlemen, Peeps Nate. But certainly, guys, it wouldn't be the same without you guys. I kid you not. And now that we're actually on Season 4, trust me, there is so much that we have in store for you guys. So trust me, just stay tuned. Many more live streams, many more pay-per-view watch parties. I'm so sorry. Premium live events. God. You know, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay. I was about to hit the first I digress of the day, but let's just save it for later on in the show. But guys, trust me, probably we might even go ahead and get into YouTube videos on story times. We don't know, but there is so much more in store for Saturday afternoon's main event. Guys, if you haven't followed us yet, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Saturday_main event or on Twitter at Saturday Main. But guys, trust me, as always, first episode of the 4th season, we have to go ahead and get into the first segment of the day, which is Fast Track. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start with it. Peeps,
yes.
You know something? The past 2 weeks, we left on the day of Double or Nothing, right?
Yes, that is correct.
That same Wednesday after, we get a tweet that says MJF is about to have a live mic in front of thousands of people.
You mean one of these? He was going to talk into one of these? Oh, wow.
You know, listen, if it comes from me, all I'm saying is wow. Why? Ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know, the Khan and Friedman saga has begun. And I can't go ahead and say it in my perfect Jim Ross voice because I don't have an Oklahoma accent. But it's okay. Why? Because, listen, about 2 weeks ago on AEW Dynamite, we got to hear MJF probably cut one of the most biggest pipe bombs since 2011, which was at the hands of CM Punk. How ironic. But you know, It's funny because, Peeps, coming from me, not once in that 7-minute promo did I hear MJF say one lie. And it was so authentic. I mean, granted, me hearing Punk for the first time in 2011, that was A1. But hearing this come from MJF, and I mean, of course, being that AEW actually lets a couple of S and F bombs slide through,
Oh,
it was the
yes.
ending that enticed me. And of course, they censored that on Turner. But guess what? If you have Fight TV or social media, you get to go ahead and get the whole 411 on it. You know, it's okay. If you guys get it, you guys get it. But listen, the fact that the uncensored part of it was A1, Tony, I want you to fire me. You effing Mark. I mean,
Yes.
peeps.
That hit hard. that really hit hard, I think.
And I mean, the one crazy thing about it is that they're going into Sasha Banks and Naomi direction by not having his merch online. He's no longer featured on the marquee that starts up the show. Peeps, what are we getting out of this?
What I think we're getting out of this is probably one of the better worked shoots that I've seen. When you referenced the CM Punk pipe bomb, that was different from the sense that although we know it was used in that platform with CM Punk and the McMahon family and with Triple H, specifically for that reasoning, and with Cena, there was, I would probably say about 95% of that was all Punk just laying it on the line, getting it off his chest, and probably having other people in the back living vicariously through him, saying the things that the people in the back couldn't say. We fast forward now to what we see today, and what happened with MJF was really good. He has great cadence, great pacing, a lot of F-bombs, a lot of S-bombs, a lot of alphabet soup. But I think going forward, we knew that this has been brewing. For those that have been following what's been going on, we remember before the pay-per-view, there was supposed to be a signing with MJF and other fans, and he no-showed the signing. And then people were wondering, well, he left Vegas. Is he going to show up at the pay-per-view? He showed up at the pay-per-view, and then he jobbed out to Wardlow in probably the biggest one-sided loss of his career in that company. He's horrifically underpaid. He was one of the first people that was signed to AEW during the genesis of the promotion, and he's still on those same. Even though I believe he re-upped about a year or so ago, but he is still horribly underpaid, and he's made it so. And knowing what he brings to the table, MJF at 26 is a savant, and you do not let that guy walk. And that's what the entire genesis of this whole thing is, that you're literally making money and having pay-per-views and having full crowds off of people like me. And I think the one thing that he said is, I make people feel. That is probably the most genuine thing that you can pull out of that entire shoot that he did. Of course, if you want to count all of the alphabet soup that came out afterwards, it's a different story. But it got to the point where the executives who were sitting there said, you know what, maybe not so much. And that's kind of where we're at now. MJF is off of TV, as you stated also earlier. They've taken his merch off the site. And now we have a little dueling sword action between Tony Khan and MJF. And we're going to see what happens from there. Luckily for AEW, they have a ton of talent that they've poached from other places, namely WWE. But MJF is the jewel that you don't bury. That's the jewel you keep shined, and you put it in a nice ring, and you wear that ring, and you showcase it every chance you get. Period.
Well, we just have to wait and see what they do with that jewels, and not being buried. Listen, jokes aside, but real talk, ladies and gentlemen, this past week we had to go ahead and go through this again, where we heard that Jeff Hardy has suffered at the hands of law enforcement a third DUI, and now he is now off AEW, suspended without pay until he goes ahead and gets into the right shape. Peeps, a lot of people on social media went ahead and started conversing saying that, oh, WWE saw it coming. Do you agree? Or do you just feel as if it was just WWE's due diligence to know if he was okay or not?
I think this is kind of a multifaceted story. It's from the WWE side. I think if you want to say that there was some foreshadowing involved, maybe somewhere in the back of Vince's head, they didn't feel compelled enough to push him further than what they were doing when they initially brought him in. Yeah. They did it enough where they gave him his old music that he had been pushing for since he came back to the company with his brother at WrestleMania a couple of years ago. And the other problem that Vince did, and this is something that Vince did a lot of when it comes to people that have had past issues. They turned his past issues into constant storylines. We know about the feud that he had with CM Punk, and they referenced his alcohol problem. We know about the issue that he had. The first really big single feud that he had when he came back was the feud with Sheamus, where they did the Shawn Michaels storyline where they had him pee in a bottle to make a drug test, and then Sheamus had I can't believe we're saying this on it, but had the urine thrown, quote unquote, in the face of Sheamus. I have to put the air quotes there because we know it wasn't real urine. We hope it was.
Of course,
it was apple juice, guys. But the point being that Vince didn't seem to see him in that same light. And let's really be honest. Jeff Hardy is 44 years old, and he has more miles on his body than a lot of other athletes do playing in other sports. Between the back and the knees, he walks and labors around like an 80-year-old. And the fact that he's still doing a lot of the high impact stuff with a lot of high spots, a lot of high energy, and he still he tries to do it. The best that he's been able to do it since he's been in AEW was that match against Darby Allin, that ladder match that everybody bristled at how he's able to do that. Yeah. You can tell he hasn't recovered from that. And it's sad to see somebody of that caliber fall apart the way they have because of just a complete compilation of injuries and wear and tear on the body. Plus, he's a recovering addict. He will always be a recovering addict. And to have that there, it's just sad to see the way it is right now. And as I remember texting you about it when the story broke, Jeff Hardy doesn't need wrestling right now. Jeff Hardy needs to be in a different headspace where he's taking care of his mental health, his physical health, to make sure that he actually has a life. He's married and has a child. He has to make sure that he's there for his family going forward. And I think that is something that has to take precedence over being in a business that has chewed up and spit out a number of really great, talented people over the years.
Yes. Well, with that being said, we hope that all is well in the Hardy compound within the months to come. We hope that Jeff will be doing just fine. Until then, let's just stay off the wrestling for the Hardys. Certainly. Speaking of leaves, guys, we have to go ahead and see another wrestler go, but this time she isn't getting released early, which means that she doesn't have a 30-day release clause. Ladies and gentlemen, Paige is leaving in 3 weeks. Yes, the Paige that you haven't seen on WWE television or hasn't wrestled a match since WrestleMania 31, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hasn't wrestled for 7 years now. And on the 7th of July, man, so many sevens. Okay. Yes. On the 7th of July, her WWE contract is ending. And from there, she is not looking to resign, which means any hopes of you probably seeing Paige in the WWE ring is compromised. Peeps, is there really much to say about this?
I hope that she can find, it seems like she has found other avenues in her life outside of the wrestling business that she's found some joy in. I believe she is she's a huge gamer. She's on Twitch. She has her own Twitch channel, which was one of the things that the WWE tried to strike down a lot of people that had their own income from websites like Twitch, where people would go ahead and stream game streams and interview streams and that kind of avenue of media, and try to take pieces of it for themselves. So Paige has been able to do that. But as far as being in the ring, if I remember, her neck was re-aggravated and led to the injury that she had. It was in a house show tag match with, of all people, Sasha Banks, who drop kicked her in the back the wrong way. And that's what led to the neck injury. And right now, she has not, from as far as we know, has still not been cleared to get physical in a wrestling ring. Now, we've seen her in the business as a manager. She was the GM of SmackDown for a small time. But apparently that wasn't either enough or to the liking of Vince and various people within the company, and there were other things that they wanted to go in a different route. Bottom line from where I'm coming from is, in 3 weeks, Saraya Knight will find a way to find something, whether it's in the business or around the business or other various areas for herself to move forward. And I think she will be okay. At least I'm hoping she will be okay. But you can tell she's very, very hurt and confused by the situation. But given the injury, could you really blame the WWE thinking that they would actually use her for anything else?
I mean, come on now. It's World Wrestling Entertainment we're talking about here. But listen, that being said, Paige, wish you the best in your future endeavors. Yes. And just believe that I will be one of those people that will be tuning into her Twitch streams almost every other day. But from there, moving to another person taking a leave of absence, and no, it's not because their contract is terminated. It's because of an injury. But let's not be sad or down about it, because I have this to say. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless Cody Rhodes. Do you blame me? I mean, peeps, listen. Yeah. We had 2 major pay-per-views to go ahead and start after we ended same. One being Double or Nothing and the other one being Hell in a Cell. A week into Hell in a Cell, we hear that Cody Rhodes had suffered a torn pec, a slight torn pec. Wasn't fully torn off the bone, nothing of that obstrosity. And now, exactly hours before, we hear that it is completely torn. We felt as if it was somewhat of a storyline. I didn't want to believe it. Why? Because they said Cody Rhodes will go ahead and actually face Rollins inside Hell in a Cell. On the pre-show, they talked about it like at least 10 times. And they kept saying the same exact words. It was like they were reading off a script. I said to myself, this has to be a work. I was wrong. Why? Because the minute Cody came out, and it's funny because I texted you while he was doing his entrance, and the minute he stepped inside the cell, stepped on the middle rope, and he lifted up both hands, and it was like he kind of remembered, oh, wait, let me put this arm down. I said to you, see, it's a work. I told you. And then his ring jacket came off. Silence fell across the Allstate Arena in Rosemont, Illinois, and Twitter went completely ballistic. And the man still wrestled a 21-minute match with a torn pec. Beat that, Kurt Angle. Bow. But listen, how crazy can it possibly get for Cody Rhodes to go ahead and wrestle a match on a torn pec, end up winning, and now we know that he is coming back in 9 months, which we know for some reason. Listen, I don't believe it's 9 months. 6 at tops. Let him get the Cena return at the Rumble and go on to main event WrestleMania. That's just me. I call my shot now. Peeps, okay. What do you think?
Without question, one of the most courageous things I've seen a wrestler do in a long time. And not just to do it because he could. To do it for him to make a point for himself, as he stated the night after the pay-per-view, premium live event, he basically said he wanted his daughter, who they haven't introduced to the WWE universe yet, to show you that, you can have a lot of adversity in life, but you got to be able to get over it. And this is one of those times where you should be able to try and do that. And in doing so, he basically stated, and this is where it came out as, if it was a partial tear, he wouldn't have worked the match. But it was a complete tear, meaning it wasn't going to get any worse. He was going to have surgery at some point anyway. So you know what? It's all for right now from here on about pain tolerance and figuring out what I can and can't do within the framework of the match and the framework of being a face, working the fans, and getting heat on the injury. And that definitely worked, because every time they looked and saw him do something, or he went into the cage, or he went into the ring post, or he got hit with a chair, or he got hit with something, the fans, ooh, ah, oh, it was absolutely insane. And the fact that he was able to do that with a torn pec, as you could see, the blood started to rush to the surface of the skin after a couple times. He took a chop. There was a chop that he took at one point, and it was like, oh, that had to hurt.
I cringed.
And then I remember thinking, I sent a text to a friend of mine. I said, thank God he's not wrestling Ronnie Garvin, because Garvin would have torn his chest open. He would have pec fibers crawling around on the ground. He would look like a zombie out of Resident Evil. So
you're not wrong.
The fact that he did that match in that style, in that show, for those people, and got that reaction, given all of the stuff that's been going on with the Sasha Banks and Naomi story, I think it was a twofold deal. One, to show that he could do it. But I think it also kind of ingratiated himself with Vince's mind to say, you see, this is the kind of thing that happens when you go through adversity. And as we saw, when the match was over, the amount of tweets, Instagram posts, all of social media lost their collective minds and gave it was unilateral praise throughout the entirety of the match and what he went through.
That man, listen, we talk about Foley is God. Listen, change that to Cody. I'm sorry, because from the minute he hit the Cody cutter and you saw him fall on the shoulder, I said, this is going to be one of those nights. And I cringed for the next 20 minutes, but I tell you, the minute the 3 count happened, I said, okay, perfect. Give him his victory. Get him to a hospital.
Yes.
But listen, it's good. Surgery was great. He's now back home recovering. Cody, get well soon.
Yes.
And until then, listen, as I said, this is the man that will dethrone Roman Reigns. Or so we think. That's for later on in the show. But listen, speaking of people hopefully coming back, there is one person that will be coming back in 2 weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, the leader of the C Nation, the Chain Gang Soldier, the one man that can sit behind 3 words known as hustle, loyalty, and respect, Jonathan Anthony Felix Cena, is returning to Raw June 27th. Of course, this means because why? It marks the 20th anniversary since his debut in WWE. Peeps, to think that it's actually been 20 years since we got the man to yell out 2 words, ruthless aggression, and slap Kurt Angle. 22 decades. Peeps.
Yes.
And to think the man was just a prototype?
Yes. Huh. Just to think, when he was the prototype, John Cena was damn near 280 pounds. He put on so much bulk that when they brought him to the main roster, he had to actually slim down because he was too muscular. But yes, when he was in OVW, and there was that group that Jim Cornette helped to bring up and train. It was Batista, it was Cena, Orton. Those are the guys that were there. And of course, you got to remember, Brock was in that mix as well.
Of course.
And you have to look at those guys. A lot of the people that we see and we talk about that the WWE continues to bring back, these are the guys that have been around, and a lot of them, with the exception of Batista, who is for the most part retired. The rest of these guys are still in the mix somewhere. Orton recovering from a really bad back, and as we'll probably talk about later on, one of those guys that I just brought up came back on television. So to see Cena, who for a very long time when he first started off, when he became the doctor of thugonomics and he was battle rapping and throwing out peanuts in people's faces and talking down and doing all of those things, to when he became a face and the fans wanted him to turn heel again, to the fact that every time he got in there, it was Cena sucks, Cena sucks. But in the realm of all of that and all the drama that he's done and all of the backstage politics, and we know Cena has done that as well, he has survived and been the constant for the WWE. Where Roman Reigns is now is where John Cena was for the previous 20 years. And this is the kind of growth that the WWE looks at as far as having a face. So you go from Hogan, then you go from Hogan to Bret Hart, and you go from Bret Hart to Shawn Michaels to Austin, and then you go in with where you are now. And The Rock, and now Cena, and Cena has kind of moved into that next phase of his professional career, and Roman Reigns is taking the mantle. But Cena was the guy that was there before and did a great job holding the water of the WWE for 20 years.
Exactly right. So hopefully we will look forward to, quote unquote, seeing him Monday the 27th. Yes. And I know Max Caster will certainly look forward to that too. That's a good inside joke for somebody actually listening in the back.
Max Caster killed me last night with his battle rap. Oh, man.
Much, man. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end to Fast Track, of course. To listen to more news and more updates, you guys can just go ahead and easily follow us on Instagram at Saturday Afternoons_main events. But guys, listen, it's funny because the comments are jumping off right now. Peeps, I just want you to look at this thread, okay? Because this right here, this is golden, okay? Would it really be the first episode the same without having to hear Hot Rod and the Phenom go back to back on messages? Listen,
good grief.
YouTube is blowing up right now with their comments. First, you have the Hot Rod, the phenomenal one, and Peeps Nate. Acknowledge me. Then you have Triple C acknowledging what a piece of garbage. I mean, listen, it gets funnier. Oh, look who finally came out the closet. It's the Phenom.
Oh, Lord.
God bless the person who gave Peeps the free shirt he's wearing now. I wish Sean's barber came back to give him the proper haircut. Then you have the Phenom to end it off. You should talk to your bald barber because you have to be. Listen, I kid you not. These guys, it wouldn't be Saturday without you two. Thank you for tuning in.
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in. But listen, on a serious note, guys, same wouldn't be what it is without a good number of people, okay? I always go ahead and talk about my uncle, of course, because he's the one that actually got me to listen to so many, listen to so many cassette tapes and 8-tracks. I thank Peace because he is my co-host, and I mean he was a part of the original 3. But ladies and gentlemen, there's always one person that we never actually get to, and we never hear their side of the story, and we never hear anything about them. Guess what? That's the good thing about today, because today we have a special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to the third member of the original 3 of Saturday Afternoon's main event. You have the Peeps, you have the Peeps Nate, you have the Triple C. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, you have the one, the only, Mr. 411.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for that introduction. Wow. I appreciate it. So many people see me for the very first time, for those handful of people that actually watch my YouTube channel. So aside from that, people are seeing me. So yes, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate that so much.
Hey, how's it going?
Life is miserable as always, but I keep going, right?
Oh, this is going to be a fun day today. I can see that.
Oh man, we're about to have a field day today. I feel like I'm on first take. This is what it really feels like. This is what it really feels like. But trust me, Mr. 411, I'm so stoked and honored to have you on today's first episode of season 4. But of course, you said this is as you just said, the first time for a lot of people listening to you, a lot of many times for people hearing you. But first and foremost, we want to get your story. Of course, the topic here is professional wrestling as always. So we want to know, what made you fall in love with this glorious sport of professional wrestling?
Well, hindsight is 2020. So unfortunately, I didn't know Hulk Hogan was going to turn out to be a racist, but he was the guy. I think most people admit he was the guy, unless you watch the NWA, which was rare here in New York City, where some of us live. But yeah, Hogan. Everyone was a Hulkamaniac at some point, I think, anyway. And then I transitioned to slowly realizing that I like more technical wrestling, and the Dynamite Kid to this day is my favorite in-ring worker of all time. And I think as we saw Chris Benoit copy a lot of his work, Davey Richards has copied a lot of his work and actually looks almost like him. If you see Davey Richards, that was the guy. And it's incredible if you read his book and you hear the stories, the influences he had on Bret Hart and his career and so on and so forth. The British Bulldogs, legendary tag team. By the way, I was furious with that WWE rankings of tag teams. You remember what they had done? Are you guys familiar with that? The rankings, and the Bulldogs, I think, came in as 4 or 5, or no, even higher. Maybe like
0 sense.
It
made
how
0
not
sense.
1 or 2? I was like, the Usos are better than the British Bulldogs. I forget. It was horrible. It bothered me so much. But
abomination.
Yeah. So then after the Dynamite Kid, though, once I don't want to say Hulkamania's popularity came down, but certain individuals came up, and that was the Ultimate Warrior. And I think when the Warrior came on the scene, first of all, I had first seen Warrior in World Class Championship Wrestling as the Dingo Warrior long before. And when he showed up in WWF, I went, oh my God, that's the Dingo Warrior. I remember being so pumped up seeing him. And we talk about the Warrior and he was the original, most electrifying man in sports entertainment. He was the guy. And, look, we could talk about him for days, but that was my early days as a wrestling fan.
Those are your early days. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
So would you say, like, as you said, you grew up a Hulkamaniac, you enjoyed the Ultimate Warrior. So would you say at that time, those were like, your like 2 most favorite wrestlers to this day, or do you have like, a couple of favorites?
Oh, no, it's definitely changed over the course of time. Aside from the Dynamite Kid still being my favorite in-ring worker, in terms of today, over the last 15 to almost 20 years, my favorite in-ring worker is Samoa Joe by far. I just feel like he's on another level of psychology that people don't get inside of like the ring anymore from a lot of people. You could put Punk on that level to a degree. I'm not saying you can't. And AJ, look, the original, like the Ring of Honor guys, you know what I mean? A lot of those Ring of Honor guys that have that psychology that we just don't see anymore.
Yeah.
Got you. So what would you say is your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling?
Oh, that's tough. Because Hogan has to be on it. I think Stone Cold has to be on it. The Rock, yes, just for that popularity aspect. The fourth is tough. It's really tough. I think Flair has to be there. Yeah, I do. That's my 4.
That's your 4. I know peeps takes liking to the last one.
It's very, when and Mr. Foreman and I, we go back and forth texting about certain things in the business wrestling wise and certain things that we miss about the business and guys. And we talk about and compare things that we've seen today based on things that we either watch growing up, or we end up saying in a lot of instances, it's better to watch on YouTube or someplace else because you get to actually watch better in-ring work, technical skill, psychology, as he brought up a little earlier as well. And you don't really get to see that integrated in the way that we're used to seeing. Like for Vince, it's all about the grandeur of the story. You can do that in the ring and entertain at the same time. The entertainment and the bluster seems to take over the actual reason why you're watching a wrestling match, is to see a match. If the match is good, you're going to be entertained. I don't necessarily have to have full-on entertainment per se. I didn't go to the arena to see the entertainment match. I came to see the wrestling match. And that's something that we don't really get the chance to see that often. So maybe this is one of the reasons why we torture ourselves to watch some of the stuff that we've seen, to get that 1 or 2 matches that will kind of sate that desire to seeing a really good match on a weekly basis. And those are the kinds of things. And to kind of piggyback on what you said, I as far as in-ring work, to me, right now, the two that I find enjoyable over a lot of people, it's Danielson and AJ Styles. I'll mark over AJ Styles, even though he's getting up there in age. And Danielson, Bryan Danielson does things now that I didn't think he was still able to do after he had all the concussions. And he's putting up some really good work in ring and having some great matches with people and pulling great matches out of great people considerably. He's hurt now, which sucks. But right now, you'll pay money to see Bryan Danielson. Period.
No question. I know you talked about WWE in terms of like the wrestling is secondary. The fans don't even know they're there to watch wrestling.
Yeah. And it's hard to tell who's cheering with all of the pumped in crowd noise. So we don't know if they actually agree with the product or not.
When they get a good match, you're like, wait, we're supposed to cheer this? What is this?
Yeah. Oh, man.
Definitely. Okay, so, from there, we understand how you fell in love with the sport. So, of course, being one of the original three, I'm saying I hear the story so many times, but I want to hear your side of the story. How did Same come to be?
It's a great story. I love it so much because I remember being in my first year at Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, New York, and I went up to the radio station and I met the Triple C. And within a matter of weeks, I guess he loved me right away. He's like, I want to put you on the show. And I was so grateful. And being on the show, doing that first 3 hours of sports talk, that's when the wrestling boom happened. And it was early 96. And I said, hey, we have a 3-hour show. What about 30 minutes, even just 30 minutes of wrestling? And I guess he pitched it to the powers that be, which we'll talk about later on. But I guess they greenlighted it, and we had 30 minutes. And we had 30 minutes early on, and it was great. I remember us having the late, great Ian Chaotic on the show doing news because I didn't have a computer at the time. So we were getting news offline of the 1,000 sources. Who knows to this day what was real, what wasn't, because then everything was out there. We didn't know what fake news was.
Yes.
So, I mean, and then the show just took off. It really did. And then before we knew it, we thanks to programming on WKRB, we were able to go to 3 hours. And 3 hours was just mind-blowing because, I mean, to have the news segments and then all the things we did on the show with like trivia contests. And I actually brought, if you're a fan of fantasy sports, I brought fantasy pro wrestling to the show. And we would have, yes, it was crazy. We would have a roster of 10 people, and based on their wins and losses and length of title reigns would accumulate points. And every season we would draft a new roster, and it went on for, I want to say, a couple of years. But
and yours truly won the first one. And
did you son of a bitch? But I mean, and then the fans. Listen, we would have been nothing without the fans. Obviously, we had a very small following at the beginning because of only being on 90.9. What do we have? 10 watts. I think we reached down the block. And a little bit of Queens. We actually went more into Queens than we did Brooklyn. And then we struck gold when we got on BCAT, which, Sean, you can talk about BCAT for a second.
Yes, BCAT was, for those that are watching it that aren't in the area, BCAT is, well, they've changed their name now. I forgot what the name of the company, the channel is now. But what they do is they were a local public access network, and they had people that would come in and they would have programming for those that wanted to, hip hop shows or the sports related shows, talk shows, etc. And what they usually would do is on the weekend, they had a block to fill. So they had usually 3 to 6 hour blocks that were empty. And what they would do is they would go to the local college radio stations and feature them on kind of like a music bed, so to speak. But what would end up happening is when they would rotate us in at Kingsborough, they would play us. And at the time that we were on, we were either doing the sports show or we were doing Same. And what ended up happening is people caught on. And then they would call up our show and like, oh, wow, you guys are on BCAT. Oh, I didn't know when were you guys on? And then we would end up getting from 5 calls. We get 10 calls. Then it got to the point where we were getting calls almost the entirety of the show. And it got to the point where it was like, this is insane that we were generating this kind of attention from just this little show that we were doing, from sports talk to wrestling that started at half an hour, then we went to an hour, then we went to 2 hours. Then we started doing 3-hour wrestling show, and an hour of that block was just wrestling music, where Triple C would have somebody call up, well, dedications. What wrestling music do you want to play? Oh, we got Austin's music. Oh, we play Ric Flair's music. We got Randy Savage's music. We got Goldberg's music. And people would call, and then they would ask questions. And it literally became its own community. Before the internet was the way it is now, we created our own community that would call up the station, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
And by the way, Peeps Nate, kudos to the Triple C, by the way, in terms of the work he put into that show, which is answering the phones. Because today, you look at radio and how many people work on a show. He was the board operator. He was the call screener. He did everything in so much time in that 3-hour period, playing the music underneath our show. We'd always have music playing underneath. And it was so much, that so many hats that we wore on that show. And I mean, today would be a different animal. There'd be so many people working on that show today. We would never do any of that, but we did it. And and then just in terms of the name of the show, the Saturday Afternoon's Main Event, and of course we were all big fans of Saturday Night's Main Event, and I just went, wait, that clicks, that makes so much sense, and then we ran with it, and it stuck. And I mean, and then of course to go further into what we would do, so we all became characters on the show, which was incredible. it was so good because I became the top heel. Now the Triple C was the heel only on Taz. He was more of the baby. You know what? In hindsight, he was more of a tweener, if you will. Yeah. If it was Taz, he was killing him. And then we had, of course, the baby face, the Peeps Nate. And the storyline just went so crazy. And to cut, long story short, we started to develop into, like, we were going to have our first match. And it was going to be it was going to be the Peeps Nate against Mr. 4-1. And we wanted to do it for months. But one of our guys on the show who contributed, Iron Mike, we wanted him to be the announcer on the show. And because of schedule purposes, he couldn't get there. So finally, people were calling in every week, when are you guys going to do this match? And we could only put it off so long. Finally, we had to do it. And it didn't go as we planned because we had a different announcer who didn't come across as well as Iron Mike would have. Now, to be honest with you, I still am the greatest booker of all time because I put the Peeps Nate over, as should have been the case. And by the way, unlike Hulk Hogan, I never got my rematch and beat him. So you still owe me a match, brother.
Yes.
Well, hopefully we can go ahead and put that up on the reiteration of the same. Why not?
Yes. By the way, I think our show made Schoolboy the thing to do, because that's basically how I won. It was a schoolboy and just walked away, and that's how it was.
Let's be inside the show, if you will. I mean, we weren't on video, so how long could the match have gone? You know what I mean? So that was my idea of, like, this match shouldn't be long at all, because what are we going to do? It's going to be even worse. It's like our brains, the way we coordinate and try to think about things, of like, this has to make sense. It has to be short. Another thing we did was somehow I got connections as I was online, and I would go to ECW shows, and it was amazing. I got so lucky. During the time RVD broke his leg in ECW, I got a connection, and I said, hey, can you get Rob on the show? And he was like, yeah, I get Rob on the show. I was like, get out of here. Rob Van Dam did our show. It was one of the greatest interviews we had. He was on for 45 minutes at least, just being a regular guy, talking everything.
Cursing up a storm too.
On FCC Airways. Oh, wow.
Yes, exactly.
I think he just said one curse, but it was, and then we also had Uncle Dave Meltzer on the show.
Yeah.
The difference with Dave was, which is still funny, Dave is in California, and for whatever reason, Dave didn't understand the time difference. So when I said, Dave, call us 3:00, but he called us at 3:00 his time. Excuse me, no, I'm getting that wrong. But the point is, he called when the show was over instead of when he was supposed to call.
Yeah, he was 3 hours late.
So the funny part was that show, if you remember, the people that came on the hip hop show after, they weren't there yet. So we were able to put that on, and we recorded it and played it later. But just the little things of the show that we got to do. And then, of course, I'm looking at my notes here to talk about the end of the show. We were talking about the rise and the fall of Same, right? When's the DVD coming out?
the rise and fall and rise again of Same. Go figure.
So, of course. Right. So then the Brooklyn Cyclones got on 90.9 FM. Somehow we got to deal with them. And then we lost. Oh, no, wait. They were on BCAT, right?
I believe they were on BCAT.
Right.
Yeah.
They were on that's how we lost it. Right. So they got on BCAT and then we eventually lost our time slot. So now we went back to that dwindling audience. And that's when we kind of went into business for ourselves, if you will, and took some unnecessary shots at the Brooklyn Cyclones, which later got back to the powers that be.
Mm.
And we were kind of shown the door, which to this day, as we talked about in the pre-show, we never got our final show. Just something that was tough because, we talked about how the people were still calling weeks, if not months, after we were gone, wondering when we would come back. And that's how much people loved the show. And the Triple C, which is funny, he'll tell you the story. He saw Joel Gertner where he works, and he talked to Joel. And Joel used to cut, by the way, station IDs for our show because when I went to ECW shows, Joel would be accessible. And I'd be like, hey, Joel, can you cut a promo for our show? And he would do that. And we later found out that he also listened to the show, which was crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. So it really caught on its own, life itself.
Yes.
Late 90s. So we always talk about, the big wrestling boom in the 80s. That's, same was that of the 90s.
We caught lightning in a bottle and we held on to it for quite some time. Speaking of lightning in a bottle, I've told the story before. That ECW show, one of the ECW shows that we went to in Staten Island.
Oh my God.
And he knows where I'm going with this. It was the day of that show. It was a thunderstorm.
Oh yeah,
we get on the Staten Island ferry.
That part.
And Triple C and I were going to meet Mr. 411 in Staten Island, and we would go over to the state, I guess you call it a stadium, a gym, to see the show. And as we're just about to cross from Manhattan going into Staten Island, the ferry got hit by lightning. Like, we're on the ferry, and all of a sudden we hear crack, boom, boom. It was a loud crash, and everybody on the ferry is looking around. The Triple C is looking at me with his eyes rolled into the back of his head like the Undertaker. And he's sitting there, oh my God, as the spirit of the night is going forward. And I looked at him like, only you. And he looked at me, he's like, hey. And then we sat and laughed for about 5 minutes until the ferry got to, we were a cast of characters, but this was the kind of stuff that we did. And then when we did get to the show, there was a huge brouhaha at that show where it was the Dudleys. I think it was from Johnny Rod's school of guys that were supposed to be getting into a fight with the Dudleys. But what ended up happening is some of the people that were there didn't know that, and they started getting into the fight with the Dudleys, and they're throwing chairs and they're throwing stuff back and forth, left and right. I was in an aisle seat in that show, and a fan 2 or 3 seats behind me during a match with Shane Douglas came down with Francine, and he either patted her on the butt or grabbed her or did something. Security jumped on this guy and yanked him out of the show. So, and
only on Staten Island, by the way. Only.
Yeah, go figure. And then the main event of that show was Taz versus Bam Bam Bigelow, and they fought in the crowd behind us. And they were throwing chairs and suplexing each other and going back and forth. And then when the show was over, we got a chance to actually talk to Fonzie, Bill Alfonso.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And that was fun. It was like 5-10 minutes, and we talked for a little bit. Everything was cool. Everything was fine. And then we left, and then we walked by. I believe it was New Jack. The late New Jack was there, and we said, "Hey, how you doing?" And he said, "Hey," and I guess he was talking to a fan. He was signing an autograph, and we just walked by him. And it was the whole show. It was fun, and those are the kinds of.
By the way, not to cut you off, but good thing you called him New Jack and not Jerome, because if you know
exactly.
the fan called him Jerome and he punched the fan right in the face. You don't know me like that.
No. Yeah, exactly. So it's those are the kinds of memories that we all collectively keep together as some of the best in our adult lives, I can say.
Got you. So I have to ask, so in collective with you guys, since the beginning of the beginning of Same in '96, how many wrestlers and high authoritative figures in the sport have you come across met or like, just had full on conversations with? And you had to go ahead and put out a number.
I haven't had a lot of interactions with wrestlers per se. I can say that I have met wrestlers, and I've gotten Ric Flair's autograph. I was at a Ring of Honor show that he did in 2008 or 2009, and he was able to sign an autograph book. So we got that. I know, talked about RVD. As a matter of fact, Triple C met RVD in Coney Island one time and was able to take a picture with him years back. And, I know Mr. 411 has been to different shows and have met different wrestlers, probably more so than I have. But as a kid, I got a chance to meet Bob Backlund at I believe it was at Nassau Coliseum when I was very, very young. He was leaving from a match and he was going back up the aisle and got to wave at him and he waved back. But that shows you how old I am. So
now, I've had a lot of encounters with wrestlers, but they never really like full conversations aside from the RVD interview. I remember, I'll never forget meeting Leaping Lanny Poffo when I was roughly 7 or 8 years old at a bowling alley. Somebody knew him and he was there. And I remember him misspelling my name in an autograph. He spelled it with a K. I was like, okay. And then, yeah.
You probably were the type of person that said, "Hey, listen, you see, this is why Randy's better."
I was like, well, isn't he the genius, right? How does he misspell Chris? How many people spell with a K?
Yeah.
Very few.
Unless the last name is Kardashian. That's the only way that happens.
Yeah, that's true.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But, so from there, we've talked about, your humble beginnings. We've talked about how Same came to be and how it, ended on, really low note. Screw the Brooklyn Cyclones. Let's put it that way. But, now in this day and age, of course, wrestling hit its peak, Attitude Era. Then came WrestleMania 17. Then it just started lowering down. Then came Ruthless Aggression. And now we're in the PG era. How do you see wrestling now in terms of, the watered down version? Nothing so much happening in the 21st century as to what it would be during the mid to late 90s.
Well, it's just all about building characters that connect with fans. You don't have that character anymore, that people, the casual fan. Keep in mind, the people watching right now are really the diehards left. The casual fan will still watch the WrestleManias and the Royal Rumbles, but those people don't have a connection with anybody there. Like when you had the Stone Cold and The Rock, you had regular people that you can relate to and good, compelling storylines. Now you have just a lot of guys that want to do their moves. Or like on AEW, you have guys that just want to get their moves in, and sometimes psychology doesn't matter. WWE, they still, of course, have good matches when they're allowed to.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it just there's that lack of connection still. And that's why the numbers keep dwindling. When we talk about ratings over the course of time, how WWE and WCW went from having 10 million viewers on Monday night to now on Monday night, they have under 1 million. That's crazy to think about that. Yeah. Under 1 million viewers. And now they're teetering, like they've had shows recently where they were 600,000 for a show? That's crazy.
Yeah. And to think that those would have been considered, big ratings, big shows. Really? I mean, think about it. Cable ratings in the kind of early days of pro wrestling, when we were talking about the height of Raw and Nitro going back and forth, they were getting 7s, 8 ratings. They're getting 5 shares, 7 shares, 15 shares. They were getting ridiculous amount of viewers to watch the show. And what we would do back in those days, we would go, it was almost like a traveling caravan. We would go to somebody's house and we would watch. And then we go to somebody else's house the next week and watch. And then we would go to a pay-per-view and go to that person's house and watch. And then we would host the pay-per-view. And then, somebody would bring food. Those are the kinds of days that you don't have today in wrestling, because the wrestling business doesn't have that same kind of connection as you stated. Also, it's not the same connection. There is a connection with fans, with certain wrestlers. It's just not the same organic feel that it was back in the 90s or even in the early 2000s. And that is probably the disconnect that is hurting the business the most, mostly because the promotions have kind of duped the fans and their intelligence as to what they think wrestling is and should be. And really all it should be is give me in-ring work, give me a reason why I should care about the characters, give me something logical, and let it go. That's it. You don't have to overbook.
With today is that building that character, because we can still get good in-ring work. Listen, if it was for good in-ring work, Ring of Honor would have became WCW because they had the best in-ring work for a lot of years, but because they didn't have any compelling storylines or great characters
or marketing,
that they remained independent. And it's just hard to do that. And listen, some characters are once in a lifetime. That's another thing. It's just hard to get that. And of course, and the closest thing that we've had in the decade to what The Rock and Stone Cold was is CM Punk. Let's be fair. He's the closest. And now we see MJF as, I don't want to say clone, but along those same lines of the CM Punk.
And a lot of people would probably make that correlation between MJF and Roddy Piper as far as the amount of heel and to be able to stay in character all the time. I just saw something just a couple of days ago with Sherry Shepherd, who is a talk show host, and she had an interaction on a plane with MJF because she wanted her son to get his autograph, and he stayed in character on the plane. So this is the kind of thing that we see with MJF. And you don't see that as much anymore, if at all, where a wrestler stays in character the entirety of existence until otherwise deemed it makes sense to be yourself. Because we see a lot of videos, social media, guys that are in a blood feud, and then you see them on social media, they're playing video games with each other.
Yeah,
or they're going on a trip. Yeah,
like heels need to stay off social media. They just can't be on it. It ruins everything that people want to see, especially like I said, that casual fan. Like, wait a second, this guy is a nice guy. Like, I even tweeted to MJF, stop showing pictures of your cat, bro. Like, no one needs to see your cat. Like,
yeah, but at the same time, as a heel, he can do that to irritate everybody else, and it'll work because it's MJF, and that's probably the only reason why he does it. And then he'll go on the next day and shoot a promo on his parents. So that's just MJF for you.
Which I have to say is by far the most enjoyable thing that I've seen on Turner Television, to date. So I don't blame you guys. I don't blame you.
He says horrible things to kids at autograph signings. It's incredible.
I've seen it. I literally saw one video where a kid just walks up to him and asks for the autograph. He's like, okay, sure. And literally he says a couple of things to the kid. And after that, the father's about to take the picture, looks at the kid, gives him the finger of doom. And I said, man. And another person he meets, the guy's handicapped. And to think you're going to go ahead and do something like this, he goes ahead and he's like, oh, guess what? I can do something that you can't. Look, stands up. I said, oh my gosh.
Wow.
I said, you can't. And he's like, look, I'm dancing. Can you dance? Wow. Look at you. I was like, oh God. So trust me, MJF, greatest heel of our time. I mean, even the way to stay in character, because, we don't, as you said, you guys, you would probably get to go ahead and see something like that back then where, the wrestlers were kind of like, coerced to stay in character. Although, like, many of them probably wouldn't. We always hear about how, the newest Hall of Famer, Undertaker, how, he'd go ahead and show up to almost every single arena in all black clothing, wouldn't go ahead and say a word to fans, wouldn't really go ahead and interact with anybody, just stay cool to himself. And sometimes even if he were to walk in some place as a regular person, people would look at him and be like, I'm not going to mess with the man. Look at him, all black clothing, the tattoo sleeves. He just may be the same person he is on television. I mean, even with like, how we hear he met his now wife, Michelle McCool, how he even said it during the Hall of Fame. She literally thought the man was Satan incarnate. I mean, the key to going ahead and staying in character is just not something that we find, in today's, day and age of pro wrestling. But, still, there's those wrestlers to go ahead and remind us that, it still exists. And God bless MJF for that.
One of the greatest characters that has ever existed that I don't think people are going to be thinking of unless they are around my age or maybe even older is Nick Bockwinkel. I talk about Nick Bockwinkel all the time. He is kind of like the progenitor of what Ric Flair became. This guy had eloquent, can talk, cut promos, and then get in the ring and be the most technically gifted guy. And initially had Bobby Heenan as his manager, won the AWA World Championship 4 times. Those kinds of characters that are like that, to me, are intriguing because while they're literally insulting you, but they're saying it in such a way that you're impressed that you're being insulted.
But
and then you go with it and do it.
Peeps Nate, what's the one attribute or the one thing Nick Bockwinkel did that none of the greats could ever do? What's the one thing?
And what is it? The one thing that I'll tell you, when he did a match, he never repeated a finishing move the same time. If you did a move, and that's the logical thing. If I'm going to do a figure 4 and you scouted it and I can't get it on, why am I going to keep doing it? So instead of doing that, maybe I'll go to an Indian Deathlock. If the Indian Deathlock doesn't work, well, why don't I just go to a pile driver? Why don't I just go to something else? And that is the mark of a great wrestler. And that's the reason why I've always been so high on Nick Bockwinkel. If you don't know about him, look him up on YouTube.
And that's the biggest problem with today's wrestling. Like, you get guys that have a finisher, and all of a sudden, over time, guys kick out of it so often that they now have to create a second finisher. So now when the crowd is watching the match, you now know that old finisher is always going to be kicked out of. So when the ref goes 1, 2, and then people go, whoa, it's like, wait, they're going to kick out because he now has a new finisher. Why you?
We're gonna be surprised when somebody gets beaten with a body slam.
Like, look at Will Ospreay, for example. Ospreay went from the Oz Cutter as his finisher to the Stormbreaker, and now he has that elbow. So he's had 3 new finishers in the last 18 months.
Yes. And the good thing is when you don't see that particular move for a long time, like, look, I give you a perfect example. The move that Cesaro used to do when he was in Ring of Honor, he called it the UFO, where he would go ahead and he would put you on his back and he would spin you around, kind of like the swing, but he did it without his arms. So he would spin around in a circle while you're spinning around, and he would put his hands on his hips and spin you around and then let you go. He only did that move once in like 10 years. You don't want to go that far between moves, but you get my point. You don't see that happen. You have a repertoire, use it, but if you can't get that move off, the psychology is come up with something else.
Of course. And I mean, to piggyback off of that piece, I mean, literally, as you said, he showed that move once throughout his entirety in WWE, and that was what? Last year at WrestleMania against Seth Rollins.
Yes, exactly.
So they do say that WrestleMania is like that one little showcase where you get to go ahead and show off a new move. Why not? And have the fans stunned on something. I mean, but to the fans that were actually sitting there for once and like, oh man, he hit the UFO. A little bit of nostalgia. You kind of felt that you were like that one man in Ratatouille once he had that first that first taste of Ratatouille. Gets a flashback to him being a little kid again. So. Once again, I listen, for the fans that really don't know Bockwinkel, go do your research. I mean,
go ahead and watch. You will not be disappointed.
Definitely won't.
Although I was heartbroken for the Super Brawl 2 at the Cow Palace with 3,000 people in a 15,000 seat arena. That was sad. Yeah,
very, very sad. Yeah, they should have done more considering the name that was on the marquee that helped being along, because this is around the time when Bockwinkel was like the commissioner of WCW at the time. You'd think that the name attachment would have drawn more, unless the San Francisco fans were so jaded by what happened with the AWA. By then, they just didn't care.
Well, certainly through that sense of history, we go ahead and we move away from this first half of Saturday afternoon's main event. Mr. 411, thank you. You're still going to be on, the second half. Because, of course, we need you saying some of these topics. But, guys, trust me, just stay here. Don't go anywhere. The second half of Saturday afternoon's main event is coming up next. All right, Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second half of Saturday afternoon's main event. And of course, we started off with Peep's most prized possession, the questions. Now, of course, you guys know if you guys want to go ahead and send in your own type of questions, go ahead, Peeps. You can point down to it. Down below, follow us on IG at Saturday afternoons _ main event. Shoot us a DM, and we guarantee that it will be featured on the next episode. So without further ado, let's get right into them. First one comes from Doctor of Thugonomics. He says, SmackDown last night was one for the ages. Vince's promo, though, not so much. Peeps, I really don't think he's wrong on this one. And I mean, you know, this for when we talked about this earlier where, like, you know, we said Vince's promo was, I told you, it really wasn't up to par due to the circumstances. And I mean, you know, we'll get onto that with the last topic of the show. But I mean, truth be told, that last match, though, if we were really putting it into perspective, I have to say, probably one of the best matches on Fox television since SmackDown debuted in 2019.
I can give you that. The thing that I liked about the match was that Riddle and Reigns, they worked the near counts to perfection, to the extent that there were a couple of parts in that match that almost seemed like Riddle was going to win the belt. I mean, there were some real aspects of that looked that way. But as far as going back to McMahon, he he did what he could to pop a rating. And I think that's literally all it was there for. Not stating anything. Everybody fell for the okie doke. Vince is going to be on. He's going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And then he shows up. He comes in there, and it was basically a glorified opening to SmackDown. Welcome to SmackDown. Howdy do, dipsy do, run off. And that
Where have you been?
Yeah.
Where's my egg?
The only thing that he didn't do was drop trial and tell everybody to KMA, you know? So.
You're not wrong on that. You're not wrong on that. Well, I mean, of course, that match had to be, you know, top tier. I'm really looking forward to what else they do in the next couple of, you know, weeks, especially with Money in the Bank. But still, Brock comes back, and now we're figuring out that, you know, they're facing each other at SummerSlam.
Don't get me started on that one.
I mean, Peeps, we haven't heard of I Digress yet. So, I mean, if you, you know.
I'm holding it back. I'm going to hold it back.
You're holding it back.
I'm holding it back.
Well, okay, no problem. HBK Chris has the next question, and he says, Forbidden Door with no MJF. I'm going faint. You know, it was funny because we were supposed to go ahead and get to this during, you know, Mr. 411's, you know, glorious interview. But I mean, now that they actually brought it up, what do you think about Forbidden Door as a whole? You know, with like, you know, everything going on and like even with the storylines with AEW and then cross-platform now with New Japan, what do you think about all of that?
I mean, it's great for the business, but the only problem is the hardest part for Tony Khan and even the president of New Japan is coordinating in terms of how do we protect people? Because if you're beating people, look, obviously they're going to beat people more in tag and 6-man tags. And I'm more inclined to believe that Moxley's going to beat Tanahashi, who is in the twilight of his career. So that's okay. But I think as this relationship continues, there's going to be that, well, wait, I don't want my guy losing to your guy. You know what I mean? That's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, we all are looking forward to Forbidden Door. I mean, you know, of course, I was actually looking forward to CM Punk versus Tanahashi, but injuries. How many injuries are we going to have this week? Injuries has been killing us. Truth be told, too many injuries this month. But, you know, we fight through those. So, HBK Chris 01, good observation. Next comes from Tombstone City, Adam, and he says, 9 months of healing for a torn pec. I thought Cody was getting the Super Cena treatment. I mean, yeah. Don't we already think that he is? I mean, truth be told, to me, I just think WWE's actually milking it to where they're saying that it's going to take 9 months, but that's just the element of surprise. We know that a torn pec usually takes 4 to 6 months to heal. Yeah,
Cena was back in 5 months after his torn pec. Triple H, he was back in 5 or 6. So, but then again, everybody heals differently, especially we're talking about torn completely off the bone. needing surgery. So this isn't like a partially torn, worry about, well, it's going to, the muscle fibers and the tendons are going to heal and that kind of thing. So what we're looking at now is, let's say 9 months, so that when he's fully healed, you can surprise everybody by bringing him back earlier than they said that it was going to be. That's probably what they're doing, to kind of oversell the injury so that you have more impact when you bring him back. Exactly right.
So, all I'm saying, just wait till the Rumble. Tombstone City Adam, we'll get that element of surprise. We'll be fine. Next one comes from Peep's most favorite person. In Tunney we trust.
Yes, he's still on the take.
Jack on the take, Tunney. God rest his soul. He says, opening up a Saturday afternoon the way it should be. Glad to have you back, Same. We're glad to have you back too, Tunney. Great to see you. Next comes from Long Island Isaiah, and he says, I'm just here for Peeps to say I digress. Well, I blame you. We still haven't gotten one. Peeps, can this be the first one? Hold on, everybody.
I digress.
Hey, that's the first one for today. There we go. First one to start.
That was the most unorganic one we've done. So I just for the beginning of the season, and then whatever else happens in the flow of everything else. So there you go.
Oh, everything else, exactly right. But that's the first one. Okay, cool. And of course, we have a live one. This one comes from the Phenom. Listen. Everybody looks in shock to go ahead and see something like this, and it's funny because about a couple of minutes before that. Well, about 30 minutes. We got this. I don't get it. I really don't get it. These guys are going ballistic in the comments, but I mean, straight up, trust me, seeing Mr. 411 on Same once again is breeding ground. It's a perfect season. It's a perfect day to have it. It's great.
Yeah. Pretty soon, it's going to look like the Brady Bunch, and we're going to have like 9 squares all around
By the way, Peeps Nates, how's your cousin Keith Lee doing these days?
Apparently, he's still limitless.
Limitless indeed.
Yes.
Well, from there, ladies and gentlemen, that gives us the end for the questions of Saturday afternoon's main event. Of course, you see that we enjoy these things. Not as much as Peeps Nate, but I mean, we enjoy them. So just to go ahead and still send them in at Saturday afternoons _main event on Instagram. And from there, we go into the last topic of the show. And of course, we've given a lot of notions to it. And I mean, yes, Vince being one of them, Cody not being able to go ahead and wrestle for a good couple of months. We found out about that a good weeks back. Hardy, I mean, of course, they try to pinpoint that back on WWE. Now Sasha. Listen, for those that don't understand, let me just go ahead and title this WWE's Hellacious Week. Okay, so let me put it this way. We start off the beginning of the week with a message from the Wall Street Journal. Listen, coming from me, I don't be reading news like that. I kid you not. If it's not coming from Sportskeeda, Wrestling Inc., The Wrestling Observer, or, Bleacher Report, I'm not touching it. But somehow, some way, I came across something on the Wall Street Journal that said, okay, the WWE board is going into a probe that questions the allegations of Vince McMahon paying off a woman $3 million after having an affair with her. And I sat there and said to myself, okay, am I going to think too much of it? Whatever, it's the Wall Street Journal saying this. I didn't think the calamity of that one piece of news would be the setting point to everything else this week. So I sat there and didn't say a word. An hour later, you then had ESPN talking about it, and then you had the Wrestling Observer reporting about it, and then you had Twitter blowing up. And I said, oh, this is actually serious. Okay, well, what do you expect out of this? And then you hear people saying, okay, they probably might force Vince to step down. Maybe he goes ahead and, he gets fired. Of course, he's the owner of the company. Like, come on, you really think, like, please. And, all of it was just going around surrounding itself like, oh, well, did you really expect this? I mean, it's Vince McMahon. The man hasn't been with Linda McMahon for almost 20 years now. Come on now. The others were just like, I mean, Vince played the persona well. I mean, he lived up to the name back in the 2000s with Trish Stratus. Did you guys not see this coming? I mean, you know, all of the little minimal storylines back in the Attitude Era came back to haunt Vince through this. And you're sitting there and you're wondering to yourself, okay, how much of this is a work and how much of it isn't? But due to the fact of it hitting the Wall Street Journal, it's real. The next day goes by, swan song, whatever. Later that night, you get the news from Raj Ganji, I believe, of Wrestling Inc., who puts out the message that there's a rumor that Sasha Banks is released from World Wrestling Entertainment. I sat there for a fat minute and I actually, texted Peeps and I called him first and I was like, hey, you hear this? He's like, hear what? I was like, Sasha news. He's like, what about Sasha? Word on the street, she's released. He didn't even know. So,
yeah.
That's how crazy it was. And then I call, Triple C, same reaction. And I'm sitting there like, okay, so if they don't know, then this means it may not actually be true. And then you had Meltzer talking about it. And then you had Sportskeeda talking about it. Then Bleacher Report for a quick second. And then you're starting to wonder, okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And then later that Wednesday, you hear that she actually has her lawyers in on this to get her out of her contract. Okay, just take it step by step. It's cool. Okay, we understand Sasha wants to leave. She's been wanting to leave. It's okay. Okay, cool. Thursday, you're still on that story, and then you're trying to go ahead and balance that alongside with Vince's story. And then yesterday morning, I wake up to my mother storming in my room talking about Rich. I'm like, what? She's like, oh, Vince is out. I'm like, what? Vince stepped down. What do you mean he stepped down? I was like, oh, okay, makes sense. Okay, so like truth came to light. Okay, he stepped down. And she's like, no, but Rich, somebody's replacing him. All right, who's replacing him? Is it Nick Khan? No, it's Stephanie. Like, okay, so you're telling me Stephanie McMahon, like, spoiled little Stephanie McMahon, princess of the McMahon dynasty, ends up leaving weeks ago and then ends up now taking her father's spot as the chairwoman and now CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment. So I remember talking to Peeps about this earlier, and I said maybe this is why Stephanie left. We were kind of iffy about it, but somehow now it makes sense because maybe they told her to leave, take a leave of absence. That way you wash your hands freely of this situation so that when Vince actually steps down, you can take over, which it makes total sense to me. But now with everything that's happened yesterday, and then of course Vince's little mimical swan song on Friday Night SmackDown last night, today is a new day, and now we have to figure out and put everything piece by piece together to understand the calamity of this situation. So let's go ahead and hear it from Mr. 411 himself, because I know Peeps, if you get into this, we're getting 14 on digresses for the day.
Yes.
So let me pass it off to Mr. 411 first. So what do you think about everything that's happened this week?
The first question is, did they hire Vince Russo back to write this storyline? Because this has his handprints all over it. It's like, if you think about it, what's going on with AEW and MJF, did they say, hey, well, we got to do something now. Let's do something that makes it look real. Now, could they have paid off all those other sources in terms of who broke the story to say, we're going to work this? Or did it really happen? I don't know what to make of it. The way everyone is getting work nowadays, I don't know. Did it really happen?
I hear you. I understand you. Peeps, what do you think?
This whole thing smacks of bad storyline. And it also is seemingly a power play. I think, first of all, for those that already know my opinion of Vince McMahon, the human being, who I've never met, but through being a fan of his company, as far as being a wrestling fan and looking at all of the things that are out there and seeing things that he has done, this is kind of like a step in line from beginning all the way to the potential end of where he has been on the spectrum of things. Yeah. I'm not even going to go that far back, but as far as I will go is, as you stated, the whole Stephanie thing. We had the incident that happened after the all of the shareholders and the money that was being thrown into the WWE for buying up all of these, for re-signing with Raw, with USA, the money that they spent for the streaming service of Peacock, the streaming service, the money that they put in for Fox. That right there in those three instances is about almost $3 billion with a B, billion. And then you think of all of that money and then all the people that have been cut. So what's that happening? Okay, that's Vince being Vince, hoarding all the money for himself and the shareholders, and then to hell with the talent. Okay, fine. Let's move past that part. And then now, as you stated before, with the Stephanie situation, after her husband had the cardiac issue, everybody thought that Stephanie had initially stepped away because of all of the things that was happening at home. I want to be with family. I want to make sure that Triple H is fine. He's not able to do his job the way it was. But then we also heard before the cardiac stuff that Triple H lost a lot of his job. A lot of the people that worked under him lost their jobs based on the fact that whatever is the issue with Triple H and how NXT was being run, it was not what Vince wanted. So that's moved away. Now we go past that and we talk about the other McMahon in the situation that was kind of shoehorned away from this, and that's Shane McMahon. If we remember, he was going to be at WrestleMania and have a match with Seth Rollins. But before that, they put him in the Royal Rumble, and he kind of tried to book himself into a favorable light by having himself go over all of these other people, which then pissed everybody off in the back to the extent that Vince didn't want him anywhere near his company. So he kind of shoehorned him away. Now you look at all of those kinds of things going on, and then we know what kind of human Vince has shown himself to be. He's admitted he's cheated on his wife before. He's admitted to that in other interviews. We find out now that they haven't been living together for a long time, and they've been living separate lives. And now the NDA of paying off somebody in an affair. I have to tell you, this sounds so much like a soap opera, it's not funny. And what makes it worse is the fact that Stephanie, who stepped away after a lot of people in the company talked a lot of crap about her on the way out, all of a sudden have ingratiated himself back into the company as the head of the WWE for now until this investigation is over, kind of leads me to believe that Vince kind of knows the way the investigation is going. He knows that it's not going to end up the way it should be. I don't know. It can go either way. I'm leaning towards the fact that this is going to take some time, and Vince is he's still booking the show, which is kind of odd. So he still has the control of creative. But as far as running the everyday, getting all of that stuff together and having a scandal where he potentially paid off someone with potential WWE stockholder money to give a hush pact to someone else, that looks really bad. And that's the part of this scandal that is people are going to look at. Allegedly paying $100,000 to somebody, doubling her salary, and then potentially paying WWE money in the process. That's where this investigation seems different than the others.
Do you think he's made a call to Donald Trump to ask him what he would do? Donald, what would you do?
I would not be surprised.
You have to deny. You did it, okay? You didn't do it.
I would not be surprised, but in general, it is absolutely it goes part and parcel with all of the other horrible things that have been alleged. And the other part of this interesting story is the fact that the person that Vince allegedly had this affair with, he was passing along to John Laurinaitis, who's the head of talent relations in the WWE. Oh, who is John Laurinaitis married to? He's married to the mother of the Bella twins. You can't make this stuff up.
Peeps. Ladies and gentlemen, and your new WWE Undisputed Tag Team Champions, Mr. McMahon and John Laurinaitis.
Oh, good grief. You can't make this stuff up.
So apparently, well, I don't want to get graphic in terms of what I heard in terms of what they did with her, but do you think he gave her an ace crusher at any point?
Oh, Lord. I guess he was trying to make sure he wasn't a dynamic dude that day.
They probably pulled the same thing Rob Van Dam used to do back in the locker rooms of ECW, puff, puff, pass, and why not? Pass it around, buddy. You know, we're good. We're good.
That's what they also used to do with Tammy Sitch, apparently, in the locker room.
Especially with Bret Hart having sunny days.
Oh, good grief. But the saddest part about the whole thing is this goes to show you the character traits that we've seen and heard of with Vince McMahon and how he does business with so many various other people, of how many times he has done something in a sexual light that have been that have been looked at as very disgusting. We've heard stories of other people that have sued him, lawsuits that are either pending or have been settled. We know about the things that he's done business-wise to hurt other companies, like what he tried to do with Georgia Championship Wrestling, which we talked about weeks ago, about what Vince did, and getting the TBS show and not providing original entertainment from his product on the network, and then settling out of it, taking that $1 million that he had gotten from Ted Turner and using that to basically finance the first WrestleMania. So these are the kinds of things that Vince has. His reputation precedes himself, but at the same time, we also know it could probably get a lot worse before it gets any better. For a 76-year-old man to have affairs like this on the docket and is paying $3 million for hush money to keep this quiet.
By the way, where's Nick Khan in all of this, by the way?
Exactly. You would have thought that Nick Khan would have been the guy, because when Stephanie was gone from the company, Nick Khan assumed her job duties as the head of branding, creative, etc. And he's just been consolidating all of these different jobs and then making Vince McMahon so much more money on the marketing aspect of it and doing all of these business deals. And it makes you wonder, if the board didn't elect Nick Khan to be CEO of the company and they went to Stephanie, that makes me really think that the shareholders, they know what's going on and they want a McMahon at the head of the company, but they didn't want Vince until they can figure out what the heck is going on.
Or the real swerve that Nick Khan is really related to Tony.
I've been telling you guys,
and that's the real forbidden door, right?
Exactly. See, I like how Mr. 401 thinks.
With John Laurinaitis and Vince McMahon and his secretary, you could say the forbidden back door.
Oh boy.
Oh, man.
And to further bring this to a full circle, as we talked about, maybe Nick Khan and Tony Khan being related. In a sad note, we know that Dave Hebner passed away, I believe, yesterday. And the reason why I bring that up is because that twin angle that we remember with Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant from the main event back in 1988, where relatives came into play for a big angle, this would be interesting if that was the case going forward with this. So wrestling never gets tiring, that's for sure.
It never does. But I guess the one question that that is just there to be answered now is, where do we see this a year from now? So do we see McMahon go back into power as CEO and chairman, or do we actually see him completely, permanently step down and having to see Stephanie as chairwoman? Because as Peeps said, it doesn't seem like the story is going to get any better.
Vince would have to be decapitated before he's run out of his own company. And the reason why this is the case is because the shareholders have the ultimate say as to what they think the CEO should be doing. And if they think that he is a detriment to the shareholders and their bottom line, which is making money and the health of the company, then Vince can be kicked out just as well as anyone else.
But don't you think they're setting up the sale? Don't you think a sale is inevitable?
I think so. The question is now, who would want the WWE and their content based on what kind of scandals have been popping up out of this company for the long run, and what company would have enough wherewithal to run the wrestling aspect of it to the extent that they know that they could satisfy their fans, so that it's just not just conveyor belt, carbon copy pizza.
I mean, they already have everything on Peacock. USA Network is owned by NBC Universal. I mean, a sale to NBC NBC as a whole wouldn't be too bad.
Right.
It's just how much more things would actually get censored and how many more things would they actually limit to World Wrestling Entertainment and like, you know, the entertainment and wrestling aspect that us fans actually still stick around for.
Yet the
Walt
better
Disney?
WWE network, the better streaming service that we were getting before the sale, the licensing agreement with Peacock outside of the United States is the same.
Exactly.
It's normal the way it was before when you could actually rewind and look at certain things and go back and forth. You could do that on the original WWE network.
But you can't do it on Peacock.
Although the service has improved over time. They've gotten better.
Yes, they have. Yes.
Still just like, you know, you can't just like pinpoint to something, or it's not like, you know, if you were to just pop open a DVD and you're like, okay, I want to go to this match, just easily do that, you know. But yeah, it has gotten better. So, I mean, a sale to NBC wouldn't be too bad. I've heard a lot of things about, you know, Khan probably wanting to go ahead and go into a full sale with Walt Disney.
Right.
Although
good grief.
I really wouldn't want to
go to see wrestling at Disney. Now, WCW licensed a lot on Universal Studios and Disney area for their product back in the 90s. Yeah. But I tell you right now, if the WWE has Mickey Mouse as the CEO of the WWE, I don't know where the wrestling business would go from there. I would really, truly be I don't know what to think. I really don't know what to think.
I wouldn't blame you. But the funniest thing,
worse than it is now.
I mean, truth be told, the funniest thing I think I've heard this whole week is from Twitter yesterday, and I think this one person came up with this storyline, and they were like, okay, if they've been really talking about this about a sale for the past, you know, several months, imagine that Vince actually, instead of giving it to Stephanie, he passes all operations to Nick Khan, signs a contract. Nick Khan's about to be introduced on the next episode of Raw. Tony Khan comes on and says, the contract does indeed read Khan, but it now reads Tony Khan. I now own WWE.
And the fate of your company is in the palm of my hands.
Imagine. And he's just going to say, I am now going to inject this lethal poison, and brings out the Jericho Appreciation Society.
Oh,
Let's
Lord.
not talk about that.
And have it simulcast on both networks. That would be funny.
Exactly. Oh. So, I mean, you know, it's just like we don't know what to expect in the next coming months. But, I mean, now we just have to take it step by step, which, you know, with us fans, when it comes to WWE, we have no patience. Because, I mean, you know, it's either they do one thing today, do another tomorrow, go back to doing what they were doing before that was completely atrocious. Yeah. And it just make us seem like we're just like, you know, irrelevant to the fact that we're the ones that make them money, you know? Yeah. So, truth be told, I myself, I want to see, and it hurts to say this, I want to see Vince back in office. It kind of hurts to say, because I mean, you know, growing up, you know, of course, there's Mr. McMahon and then there's Vince McMahon. Of course, you hate Mr. McMahon because, I mean, like, for God's sakes, the man went into a whole, like, close to, like, 10-minute match with God, you know?
Yes.
We don't always talk about that so much.
And hearing Joey Styles cutting that promo, he mocks God.
So, I mean, you get the memo. But it's like, you know, if, you know, he's just sitting back in his chair again, do we really have to say, okay, there's going to be a potential sale? Because that's the one thing you don't put with WWE in any comparison. You can't go ahead and just put the two together and just be like, okay, WWE and sale. Those are two words that match completely right. Because,
but the dream is, I mean, we can keep it as a dream, but we could have a WWE where the head booker is Paul Heyman. Triple H is continuing to develop NXT, and you get multi-million-dollar backing from a perspective like that. And then you can just say, well, we're going to build out talent and do what we need to do. Oh, that's a dream. See, a pipe dream, but it's still a dream. I'm allowed to dream, right?
Of course, we're all allowed to dream. But to me, that's what I really thought was going to be, you know, the innuendo. Because for me, when I heard Stephanie's taking over, I was like, okay, you know, if she's taking over, then that means, you know, Hunter's back in his place, works with NXT, you know, maybe bring back Bischoff as, like, you know, someone.
I think that's a bridge too far. A bit too far. I think that's one bridge that you have to.
Is it Bischoff or Russo? Let's be for real. Let's be honest here. Would you rather Bischoff or Russo?
I'd rather poke
Neither.
myself in the eyes.
Right. No, listen,
With a pickaxe.
if you have Paul Heyman as head creative and people underneath him like HBK, Triple H to a degree, I mean, with his limitations, of course, now, but
bringing Gabe Sapolsky to help out.
Bingo! I was just going to wow,
good, yes.
great minds think alike. I was going to say exactly that.
See, we're here. We're here. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
And then reinstall, and this is the main problem with the company, and that is the championships that they have in the WWE don't mean anything. And if you're going to put the belts on Roman Reigns, and then he's going to be off television for 5 weeks, 6 weeks at a time, or whatever it is the case, then okay, you've got 2 singles titles. You elevate the US title for now. You elevate the Intercontinental title for now. And then you run those as your important singles championships until the main guy comes in and says, I'm going to break someone's neck or whatever he's going to do. They don't do that. They're toys. And then you don't believe in who the wrestler is as the champ because they don't book them as important. It just doesn't make any sense. But I digress. So there we go. There's your first one. There's your first organic one for me today.
Well, that makes 2, ladies and gentlemen. That makes 2. But certainly, I mean, we just have to wait and see. Because, I mean, for myself, now that we know, Vince is still going to be running creative, which I could have sworn if he wasn't, listen, I actually would have gotten back into watching NXT. But, that's a story for another time because we don't really talk about that unicorn vomit piece of
there you
God. Yeah, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do this, ladies and gentlemen. Not today. Not today.
Yes.
Not today.
I have the Lysol for it because the stink is still there. So
exactly. You don't have to say too much. You don't have to say too much. But trust me, ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end to season 4, episode 1 of the phenomenon known to all as Saturday afternoon's main event. We thank you for going ahead and tuning into the first episode. But certainly, it wouldn't be possible without each and every single one of you. And once again, have to go ahead and give a big thanks out to Mr. 411 for being on the first episode.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Standing ovation.
Thank you.
Even though I could have pulled the MJF, but yes, I can vouch for a standing ovation. But thank you, Mr. 401 peeps. As always, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming in and just having to go ahead and fulfill the job of being the co-host. We are all valued. We all love it here. Yes. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope to see you next time on the next episode. With that being said, on today's episode of Saturday Afternoon's Main Event, I, the Phenomenal One.
And I, the Peeps Nate.
Mr. 411.
We came.
We saw. And in the words of Paul Heyman, we conquered.
We conquered. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. We will see you next week for episode 2. It's the Phenomenal One, Peeps Nate, and Mr. 411 signing off. Peace.
Chef's kiss.
Farewell.
There you go.
And I bid you adieu.
Yes.
And have a
just remember, a pat on the back is 18 inches away from the kick in the butt, as Barry Horowitz used to say.
The innuendos. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.
Yes.